My name's Josh. This is Katie. We have the privilege of leading this wonderful church. And we, once a year, talk about finances and giving and vision for Sundays. Now, we're aware some of you may be new here today, so you're so welcome to be with us. Don't feel any obligation to necessarily think, but we just love to share our values for giving, and this is one of the things that we'll be doing today. This year, so we were going to link it all with Vision Sunday, which we have generally around this month. If you look at the website, you'll see a previous Vision Sunday around this time of year. But we felt prompted to change things this year. Instead, we wanted to speak about financial giving as a spiritual practice, something that leads us into a richer, more life-giving relationship with God. Don't worry, for those of you expecting Vision Sunday, it's not been forgotten. We're going to speak on that around the autumn term, where we sense God is going to lead us as a church. Now, for those of you who love this Sunday because you love graphs with different colored bars, there are going to be a few of them this morning, but if I said finance update, you wondered whether this was the moment to fall asleep, or you felt pressure to part with your cash. Don't worry, we are sharing values and visions. We've kept things simple. We've been praying that in God's kindness, He is going to bring us into increasing freedom and true joy in relationship with money and material things too. In the last few weeks, we've been reading from the Old Testament, and we've looked at on Sundays some inspiring women who have played a significant role in God's relationship with His people and all of humanity. Next week, Ryan is going to be doing the final talk in this series. Today, we want to remain in the Old Testament in a story about God's care and provision for the Israelites and their response. So we're going to read from the Bible. If you've got one, feel free to take it out. It's from 1 Chronicles, chapter 29, verses 1 to 20. And if you haven't, don't worry, the words will appear on the screen. And if you wonder why Katie's here, we're doing this talk together. So she's going to start with the reading.
Fabulous. I'll just wait until you can't see the words. Hillary's doing a great job, but she can't find the words from 1 Chronicles. Josh forgot to put them on. Never mind. Well, we'll read them out. If anybody wants a Bible here, you're very welcome. If anyone would like a Bible, come and grab it. In fact, it's even on the page, even on the right page. Come and use my Bible if you want to. Okay, so this is 1 Chronicles, chapter 29, starting at verse 1 and up to verse 20. Then King David said to the whole assembly, "My son Solomon, the one whom God has chosen, is young and inexperienced. The task is great, because this palatial structure is not for man, but for the Lord God. With all my resources I have provided for the temple of my God, gold for the gold work, silver for the silver, bronze for the bronze, iron for the iron, and wood for the wood, as well as onyx for the settings, turquoise, stones of various colors, and all kinds of fine stone and marble, all of these in large quantities. Besides, in my devotion to the temple of my God, I now give my personal treasures of gold and silver for the temple of my God, over and above everything I have provided for this holy temple, 3,000 talents of gold and 7,000 talents of refined silver for the overlaying of the walls of the buildings, for the gold work and the silver work, and for all the work to be done by the craftsmen. Now, who is willing to consecrate themselves to the Lord today?" Then the leaders of families, the officers of the tribes of Israel, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, and the officials in charge of the king's work gave willingly. They gave toward the work on the temple of God 5,000 talents and 10,000 darics of gold, 10,000 talents of silver, 18,000 talents of bronze, and 100,000 talents of iron. Anyone who had precious stones gave them to the treasury of the temple of the Lord in the custody of Jael the Gershonite. The people rejoiced at the willing response of their leaders, for they had given freely and wholeheartedly to the Lord. David the king also rejoiced greatly.
We continue in verse 10. David's prayer. David praised the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly, saying, "Praise be to you, Lord, the God of our father Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. Now, our God, we give you thanks and we praise your glorious name. Verse 14, but who am I? And who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. We are foreigners and strangers in your sight, as were our ancestors. Our days on earth are like a shadow without hope. Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building your temple, for your holy name, comes from you, and it belongs to you. I know, my God, that you test the heart and are pleased with integrity. All these things I have given willingly and with honest intent. And now I have seen with joy how willingly your people who are here have given to you. Lord, the God of our fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, keep these desires and thoughts in the hearts of your people forever, and keep their hearts loyal to you. And give my son Solomon the wholehearted devotion to keep your commands, statutes, and decrees, and to do everything to build the palatial structure for which I have provided. And then finally, verse 20. Then David said to the whole assembly, praise the Lord your God. So they praised the Lord, the God of their fathers. They bowed down, prostrating themselves before the Lord their King.
Okay, so if you have got a Bible open, you might want to keep it open, because we'll be referring to some of these verses as we go through this morning. And I think an image might come on the screen, the title one. There we go. So we're going to be thinking about, for a bit, before we get into some of those pretty graphs that Josh mentioned and a bit of a kind of finance update and where things are, we're going to be thinking about what it is to be generous. Like, why give of our money to God's kingdom purposes, to the church? And if we are to do that, if we are to give our money to God's purposes, what is God looking for in terms of our heart attitude? So first up, unlike charitable giving to a charity where people give because they want to see the work of that charity grow, giving for those of us, whether we're here today, if we say that we follow Jesus, has an even greater purpose than just that. It not only facilitates the work of that organisation, in this case the church, which is really important, as Martin mentioned earlier, creating a home, doing stuff in the church costs money, but actually it also changes the heart of the person that gives. Therefore, financial giving becomes a matter of discipleship. Discipleship meaning how we walk closely with Jesus, following in his footsteps, becoming more like him, becoming a person of love. So how is giving as discipleship? How does that actually work? Well, first and foremost, giving is worship. We've called this talk an act of devotion, because the giving of our stuff, the things that we own and our money, our possessions, is an expression of our devotion, our affection, our love for God. King David in this passage says in verse 3, in my devotion to the temple of my God, I now give of my personal treasures. This is David's act of devotion to his God and to his God's presence. In those days, the temple was the place where God dwelt on earth. Because of Jesus, now God dwells everywhere. We don't need to go to a special building to encounter God. In fact, if we've invited Jesus into our lives, he actually even lives in us in some mysterious, miraculous way. However, we are still giving to God's presence in the world. We are giving as an act of devotion to him. King David and the people that he led clearly knew how good their God was, how good it felt to be in his presence. So they wanted to get that temple built as quick as possible and as beautifully as possible so they could be near to their God, and so that they could pour out their affection with all this gold and silver and onyx and marble that we see mentioned in the passage. They could pour it out at his feet as an act of worship. Verse 20, then David said to the whole assembly, Praise the Lord your God. So they praised the Lord, the God of their fathers, and they did this by bowing down. They prostrated themselves. They lay down on the floor before their God and their King David. Now, can you imagine if our giving in this church, in the churches of the UK, was done with such exuberance? Now, I don't know whether you've ever been to some other parts of the world. I know we've got some friends here from various different parts of the world, and my guess is there's some other parts of the world that do this whole giving thing in a rather more exuberant, excited fashion than some of us do here in the UK, and I've seen that with my own eyes. In the passage, the people, by prostrating themselves on the ground, these people were saying, "You, Lord, are holy. You are above us. You are our King. You are our leader. We choose to be at your service. We humble ourselves in your presence." And I love it in verse 5 when King David asks of his people, "Now who is willing to consecrate themselves to the Lord today?" Consecration is a bit of a funny Christian-y word. You won't hear it that often out there in the real world. But essentially what it means is to make something, an object, or someone holy. Holiness means to be set apart from what is unholy, and to be made completely and joyfully devoted and available to God for his use. Being consecrated as a person to the Lord is basically saying with your life, "I am so blessed by you, Lord. You have given me everything. You have blessed me with love I could never measure. I am wholly yours. I am devoted to you. Do with me what you will." I wonder whether my giving begins like this and as an act of devotion and consecration. I wonder whether your giving begins like that. Giving as worship also acknowledges God's supremacy, that everything is his anyway. In verse 14 it says, for everything comes from you and we have given you only what comes from your hand. It's yours anyway. We're just giving a portion of it back to you. You have made all things. God has been so generous to us in giving us life itself, as well as every other good thing that we get to enjoy in creation. So when we're giving of our finances, our material possessions, we are simply giving back to him what is rightfully his anyway.
Giving, the next point, is about being dependent on our God. It's how we practice. And we use that word practice deliberately because none of us finds this necessarily easy or intuitive. To trust God to provide for us, that is. Money is essential to life, to our survival. We need food, we need shelter, we need healthcare. It's often tied up with enjoyment of life. Money means people can go on holiday or not, or go out and enjoy special times or not. For some of us, money doesn't seem to cover the bills. We've not experienced the privilege, for some of us, of having extra income. And daily we're praying for that provision from God. But when each of us gives according to our financial resources, we're declaring God loves us and he is able and willing to provide the stuff for us. Now the next point.
I hope you're enjoying this double act, the switching of the microphone. Thirdly, giving sets us free from the tyranny of money. So this act of giving that we've seen in this passage to build the temple of God is accompanied with great joy. It's there throughout the entire passage. David's prayer in verses 10 to 13 is a song of praise. This was an exciting, wonderful occasion and the people were full of joy. And it's as if David in that song of praise can't even find the right words or enough words to express just how worthy his God is to receive his gifts. Yes, sacrificial giving of our money, it absolutely costs us. Sometimes it means that we have to miss out on stuff that we might like to do. Sometimes it might mean that we're unsure quite how we're going to pay for that particular thing that we feel we need. But in our experience, we always receive back from God a greater treasure when we give generously. We always are going to receive joy. And not just that, but money will increasingly lose its hold over us. It will no longer be such a source of anxiety as we practice trusting God, blessing Him, blessing others with our finances, and seeing the often unexpected ways that God provides for us materially and even blesses us. This has been really true in our life. Now, when I was growing up and going into kind of early adulthood, to be honest, my attitude towards giving was not one of generosity. It was something I felt I should do. I didn't really want to do it. I was a bit concerned that therefore if I gave that I wasn't really going to get what I wanted. I thought I might miss out on nice things that I wanted to do. However, I never realized until I began to give generously what great joy I would receive in return. How I would be more set free from worrying about money. You see, we can never outgive God. We may or may not be blessed with more money when we give. That isn't like a given, that if we give a certain amount of money, God's going to give it back to us in another form or even more. That absolutely may happen, it may not. But we will always receive some form of greater return on what we've invested. And so often that's going to look like the priceless gifts of even more peace and even more joy.
Giving results in future riches. It's not something, well, I don't fully understand it. I wonder if you do, well, then feel free to talk to me afterwards. But I don't think it's really easy to understand what it means to these in terms of future riches. None of us has been to heaven and returned. I don't think that's the case looking around. But Jesus tells us, and Jesus knows the Father and has been with the Father from the beginning. So Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 6, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. This is played out in Luke chapter 12, verses 16 to 21, the parable of the rich fool. His land produces a good crop, and he continues to build bigger and bigger and bigger barns to hoard this wealth. But one night, he dies. All that wealth, what he thought that money could buy him, is lost forever. I don't know if you remember, we talked about Abigail. She had a husband called Nabal. This is in the series about that we've been doing recently. Nabal failed to be generous in his hospitality towards King David and his men, or he wasn't king of that, but he preferred to feast alone. He also died suddenly. It just makes better sense or feel to invest in spiritual riches that will last eternally by being generous to God and others now, rather than living extravagantly in a way that only benefits us and is temporal, as we take nothing with us when we die.
Giving extends God's kingdom and demonstrates God's generosity to the world. So we want to see God's kingdom rule and reign extended across Oxford and beyond. That's what brought us personally from Nottingham, a few miles up the road, to Oxford, with that call and that passion on our heart that God would do amazing things here, that he would extend his rule and reign. Now, what does that actually look like in reality? Well, that absolutely looks like providing spaces like this, where we can gather, people can gather, and get to know God better. It looks like spending money on resourcing, how we share Jesus creatively with people outside of the church. We're going to be doing a bit of that in a couple of weeks' time. The 5th Sunday in May, we're going to be going into the park, Florence Park, and maybe giving out some chocolate bars, giving out some other things, having a conversation with people. Some of that costs money. It looks like providing for the material needs of those in our city and beyond who don't have enough to get by. That's why we love serving our city through small steps. And you saw earlier the image of our unit in Templar Square. That is a children's clothes and equipment bank or resource that gives away free stuff to families in need in Oxford and Oxfordshire. This is what it looks like to be a people that are extending God's kingdom. Ministry, which is that, extending God's kingdom through the local church, involves money. In fact, the biggest cost being salaries. The church represents God's kingdom employees. We're all part of that. If we call ourselves a follower of Jesus, if we're part of a local church, we're kind of on God's payroll almost. We're one of his employees. But also there are some people who spend more of their time working within the church to make things happen, to facilitate the ministry. And so it is the case, I think, probably in every church that the bulk of the money that comes in through people's giving is spent on salaries, allowing those that lead to lead the ministry and ensuring that they have an income so that they can pay their bills. And you can find lots of examples of this in the New Testament, for example, in 1 Timothy chapter 5, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. But as well as salaries, money is also needed to pay for equipment. Stuff like the media stuff or the stuff in Hope Kids this morning. We need to hire a venue every Sunday like this. That costs money. We really want to do hospitality well. We want to provide good quality snacks and drinks at our gatherings so that people receive a warm welcome, because that's our God. He gives us a warm welcome. Now this week, Charlotte, who's been overseeing referrals to our Small Steps project and is leaving her role actually at the end of this month, shared this message with Josh that she'd received from a referring organisation. So different organisations across the county refer families into the project that have a need for different equipment or clothes, that kind of thing. So this is an email from one of those referring organisations. I just wanted to let you know that one of the counsellors at Refugee Resource told me that her client who visited Small Steps was overwhelmed with gratitude for the warm welcome and support that she'd received. She was especially encouraged that she was able to speak to a French speaker. Charlotte speaks French. The support that you and Small Steps gave made a very positive impression on the client and her counsellor. So thank you so much for your help. If you are one of those people who've given to the work of this church, to Hope Vineyard, that's the kind of thing that your money gets spent on. That's what giving to the church facilitates.
You may not know the story of Hope Vineyard, but it's one of generosity. For example, the church responded and gave exactly what we hoped to when we had a gift day. This was a number of years ago. We'd set out the vision. It was in lockdown. We couldn't see people, but we had screens, and the vision was for us to raise £15,000, which we had no idea as to, but this was what it was going to cost. So what then happened was people gave. And in fact, people didn't just give that amount, but they gave an extra 10% that we'd pledged, whatever would come in, would give. So it was over £16,000 that was given. We were able to give away 10%, and there was left pretty much, I think, to about £30, £15,000. It's amazing when people respond together in being generous. And we're part of a generous community, and we're so grateful for God is doing through Hope Vineyard up to this point. And it's only possible because people have given. In terms of as a church, the money that's given, what we do is we spend 22% on things that are outside the costs of running the church. We want to be a generous church, and that money is given away as agreed by the Board of Trustees. In the financial year just gone, we've significantly invested in Small Steps, and we also gave a proportion of the money that was of that 22% to Love Oxford network of churches, and also through an initiative which is called Oxford Schools Chaplaincy, and it's led by an inspiring woman called Hamara. She wrote a letter earlier this year in response to this gift. It's to you. Dear trustees and church family of Hope Vineyard Church, Oxford, on behalf of Oxford Schools Chaplaincy, I would like to express our sincere thanks for your church, for the very generous gift of £3,000 to support our work. Please pass on our gratitude to the whole church community. That's what I'm doing now. Your partnership enables us to continue sharing the Christian faith with young people across Oxford schools, encouraging young Christians among them. It is a joy to see Oxford School Chaplaincy continue to grow, and we thank God for opportunities we have to meet with students and share his word. Her letter goes on to talk of lessons in schools that are given over the Easter period and continued support of 9 Christian unions in the area as they read the Bible, run events to share the good news about Jesus. And in her email, Hamara said this: I'm utterly humbled by your incredible generosity, generous gift to the work of OSC. our treasurer, got in touch with me to let me know that a gift had arrived from Hope Vineyard. What a huge encouragement. You have truly blessed my soul in the Lord. Isn't that amazing?
So what do we do? How might we practice being a generous giver if that's something that we want to do? There's no compulsion here. This is just purely an invitation. Well, as we said, it begins in worship and consecration to the Lord, giving of ourselves to him and to his purposes. And so I wonder how aware you are, how aware I am of just how kind God has been to you and to me. How much are we noticing and experiencing his smile over us, the way that he's intervening in small or larger ways in our lives? How much are we actually living in the reality of just how much he cares about us? Do we really believe that he is more than able to meet our needs and may even just go and bless us abundantly? Now, if we know some of these, if we can answer yes to these questions, if we know some of this to be true, our giving is likely to flow naturally, or be like a glass being filled up with water, where there's so much water that the water just overflows down the sides of the glass. That's what generous giving looks like. It becomes the overflow of our grateful and trusting hearts. But here are a few principles to guide us. A few questions you might want to ask of yourself. How much is between each of us and God? When we give it as well and what we give. That's completely between us and God. It's our act of worship. And as we've said, we don't want anybody here to ever feel pressurized to give anything at all or to give a certain amount. It's entirely between you and the Lord. But what we're wanting to do is teach from the Bible and extend an invitation to each of us to seek the Lord on what he might want each of us to do next. So a good question to ask yourselves if you're wanting to be a generous giver is, what might generosity look like for me? It will look different for each of us. We all have very different circumstances. But we'd invite you to ask that question rather than how much I can afford after bills. What is actually God inviting you to give? And also ask God to give you great joy as you give, just like we've seen in this passage. To view it as putting your trust in his kindness, just as a small child puts their hand in the hand of their parent. This is about our hearts, as we said at the beginning, much more than actually about the money. Verse 9 of our passage says that the people rejoiced, for the giving had been done with great freedom and wholeheartedness. Now, on a practical level, where do we begin in thinking about how much we give? And again, entirely between you and God, but just a few thoughts on that from us. Now, you may or may not have heard a word called tithing. Now, this is a tradition from the Old Testament of giving 10% of your financial income. Well, it was to the temple at the time. It wasn't to the local church, but these days it's to the local church. Your spiritual home, where you go week in, week out. Now, you might be visiting us this morning, part of another church. You may be giving there. Please continue to do that. As I said, tithing was a practice, a tradition, a commandment, even in the Old Testament of the Bible, for the people of God. Believers in the New Testament, after Jesus came, they continued to give proportionally of their income to God through their local community. And they were often so generous that it said in the New Testament that no one ever went without. They gave more than actually the people needed. And they started being able to be incredibly generous, not to their own, not just to the early Christians, but to those who were far from God. Regarding the 10% figure, we personally have found this helpful in our lives. And it's something that we've practiced in the different churches that we've been part of over the years. However, it's this idea of 10%. If that just feels too much, if that puts a barrier between you and being a cheerful, generous giver, pray about trying a smaller percentage and see what God does in your heart as you trust him with that. But also equally, don't let 10% be the limit. Maybe the Lord is actually inviting you to give a higher percentage of your income or to supplement that 10% with one-off gifts. Now, you may be wondering at this point, well, if I am to tithe, this whole 10% thing, Do I tithe on my net or my gross salary? Do I tithe on what comes in before the kind of tax goes out, or do I tithe on after the tax has gone out? Well, Josh remembers a good friend telling him that he'd heard a pastor reply to that kind of question like this. Well, do you want to be blessed on your net or your gross salary? It's up to you. Just some very practical things. Giving through our giving page on our website, hopeoxford.org, is the best way for us as an organisation for people to give, as it means we can collect gift aid from the government if you happen to pay tax. Regular giving in this way also helps us with financial planning, as we just know how much is coming in every month. But if that isn't possible for you, there are other ways to give, and details of that can be found on that giving page of the website. And we're also looking into how people can make cash donations and also give by card in the future. We've just been a bit limited by our admin up to now, but we wouldn't want that to be a barrier to people being able to be generous. Now, we put out a few postcards. They're not on every chair, but there probably is one near you. It's got a little kind of turquoisey blue bit at the bottom, which looks like this. It's got the 4 practices that Martin talked about earlier at the top, and then it's got a QR code. Now, that will take you to the Connect page of the website, which has a giving bit that you can click on there if that's something you would like to do. And just to let you know, for a while we've been wanting to and thinking about how we might start to incorporate financial giving into our worship on Sundays, as many churches do across the world. I remember growing up, I don't know whether you do, with the little bag that used to be passed around the rows in my Church of England church. We're not going to do it exactly like that, but watch this space, as this is something that we really want to do. We want to make our financial giving of our gifts to God, just like in 1 Chronicles, part of our worship on a Sunday.
So also, we wanted to be transparent with you about our personal giving. In today's passage, we saw that there's a good precedent for this. King David gave first and was explicit about what he'd given. He and the other leaders of Israel modeled generous giving to the people, and they responded. After that, we're told in verse 9 and 17. So just to let you know a little bit of our story, we've practiced tithing both when we were single and also in the last 21 years of marriage. We give 10% of our income, including on financial gifts we've received, such as an inheritance, through seasons of plenty and also through seasons of not having so much. On top of this, we felt prompted at certain times to give one-off additional gifts or make additional pledges to give on a monthly basis, whether it be to particular projects or building projects like at our last church, or small steps when it began, or to charitable projects or people as we feel prompted. We also have got out a particular a certain amount of cash each month in order to be generous to people that just that we just come across, and that was something we fell off in the last number of months, really, and so we just felt prompted. Actually, this is something we want to pick up again. Now, giving, as Katie has said, to us has always been a joy. At times, we have faced difficulties with our finances, but we've seen God repeatedly provide for us over and over again. Gifts of money from friends, money given anonymously, even cash envelopes through our doors. We've heard of this happening within our church, and we are well, in God's church, but we're part of. But we're so grateful for the generous people around us. In preparing for this talk, we wanted to review our financial giving and prayerfully consider how God might be inviting us into a greater measure of generosity. Both of us work in other jobs, and between us we volunteer about between 3 and 5 days a week, depending on the week, which impacts our income. And of the impact of the income we receive, we make sure it's our growth income that we tithe. So we're reviewing the charities that we give to. We're going to continue with that, and we're praying about what next too. Now, these are the accounts, and what we've done this time is we've actually put the different years up to give you a bigger picture, stepping back picture. So, by God's grace, we have healthy accounts. Thank you, God, and thanks to those here. The staffing costs, which are in the dark blue at the bottom on the graph, they've been limited according to our income. So we've made sure as trustees we've not spent too much on staffing according to our income. So currently, there are 2 members of church staff, which are Katie and I, and we're both employed 1 day a week. Now, also, I'm employed half a day by the Vineyard Churches movement, which comes through the Hope Vineyard payroll, because I do a role which is linked to racial and ethnic diversity for the group of churches we're part of. Additionally to that, as I say, it doesn't matter about my volunteering, but yes, so 1 day a week each. Since 2022, we've outsourced finance. So that's why the blue chunk came down, because finance and admin are now outsourced to people that do that full time, but a proportion of our time, of their time is spent on Hope Vineyard. And we found that's a more sustainable way for us going forward. I should say that these lovely pictures are from Andy, who's our finance person, and we're grateful to him for that. Okay, so if you want to know what the colours are, the grey that you can see, it says Encounter Jesus. That's our code for what happens on Sundays. We come here and we encounter Jesus together. But the grey doesn't include the rental costs of this area. And so in August 2026, the year ending here, part of this grey, which is Encounter Sundays, will increase because we're now renting here. And we've actually put that into the admin costs because it's admin and premises. So these two slides have increased rental costs in there. The 22% that we talk about is the green and the light blue at the top combined. The light blue indicates that 5% of our income goes to the general Vineyard churches centrally, which is what each Vineyard church is invited to do. And it also includes the gifts that we make to charities. The green is also part of the 22%, and that's what we spend on Hope projects, which includes Small Steps and other initiatives that we do. Some of you may know that in this last financial year, we've been responsible for employing Ryan. Now, this is in partnership with a charity called Novo US, and that's from a different restricted fund, so that doesn't appear in this graph because Ryan raises that money separately with Novo US. The red dotted line you can see is our general giving, and it includes the gift aid claimed back. Now, this is saying that if our general giving stays the same, then the generosity, or as generous as we've been in the past, will struggle to be that generous unless we reduce some of our core costs. So with the finance team and our trustees, we decided actually we're going to go forward and rent this place because we believe that God's going to do something and help us grow as we move into this in faith.
So what would it look like if our finances more than covered current costs and grew even further? By the way, just to say, some people love this kind of stuff and they want all the facts and figures and they want the graph. If that's you, please speak to us. We can send these things to you. If you've got particular questions on anything, appreciate it's a little bit small on the screen. That's absolutely fine. We're more than happy to explain anything that you want to have explained. But yeah, what would it look like if our finances were more than to cover our current costs and were to grow even further? As Josh has said, we are covering our costs, so that is good news. But we would love things to grow because we would love the stuff that we do, God's kingdom stuff that we do, to grow and to impact even more people's lives. So, for example, what would it look like if we could develop further the work of Small Steps among children and family in Oxfordshire? What would it look like if we were able to establish a youth initiative? We meet in a secondary school. There's loads of opportunity here. We're really excited about all these young people we're hearing about who are starting to get interested in spirituality and in faith. And they're connecting digitally online. There's so much opportunity in terms of digital evangelism. All this stuff could happen if there was more money. And crucially, at the moment, there isn't enough money to pay Josh for more of the time that he spends working for Hope Vineyard. Now, we're not concerned about our personal income because the Lord has been so faithful to us over many, many years in providing for us. We both have other jobs. We're bivocational, so it's really not about us paying our bills. Actually, it's more about what we've begun to realize is that the vast majority of Josh's time in particular is spent doing the stuff of running church. So doing the stuff that needs to be done to run any organization, any charity. And that's great, and that absolutely has to be done. But it does mean it's not actually leaving him with much time to do pastory stuff, to do actually the things that he's most gifted in, he's most passionate about, the things that brought us here to Oxford. So, for example, these might include, speaking to people outside of the church about Jesus and training others to do the same, discipling people who are new to faith. Josh quipped to me recently that especially since moving to Greyfriars School, as wonderful as it is, he has actually spent far more time packing away chairs and cables at the end of a service than unpacking what God is doing by the power of his Spirit in people's lives. And he would ideally like that to be a bit different. So if there was more money around for staffing costs, that might mean that Josh might be able to spend more of his time doing pastoral ministry and outreach. And we'd also love there to be money to pay for some of that other stuff I just talked about, some of those ideas, and maybe to pay for other people to do ministry amongst children, families, young people, students alongside Ryan, and maybe other groups of people in and outside of our church. In his book, Stuart Bell, it's his book called Recovering His Reputation, he makes a simple but important point. He says, if 10 more people in a church take up tithing, that 10%, giving 10% of their salary regularly, that's basically equivalent to a full-time salary of someone in a church, a pastor. If our regular giving were to increase, we could also continue to give to small steps and to give to that 22% even more generously than we've done already.
So, I just felt prompted to say that in terms of the Connect page, increase in volunteering can also mean that there's different things. Also, when we're thinking about the resources, time is a resource as well, and so that may be also inviting others to join in what God is doing is another thing that we can do. So we'll give you a quick look at the Hope Projects part of it. I'm going to blitz through this because of time. So the next slide shows Hope Projects. I think the headlines here are that we've had funds in the past, the yellow and the grey, but this last year, the green has been the green from the last graph. So we as a church have subsidised with our 22% a significant proportion of that. Now, if we're going to continue to do that, our giving will need to increase. But also another way is that we're employing someone who's going to have be the Small Steps lead, and part of their funding target will be to bridge that gap, that shortfall, which is money yet to be raised. And so do pray for that as we recruit for this Small Steps role. Just to say in terms of Small Steps expenses, their staffing costs are pretty much plus 90%. In fact, I was quoted 94% is staffing costs. And so the expenses are small because much of what we give away is given to us, and we pass on the donations we've received. Okay.
Right, you might be pleased to know we're nearly done. So, as we kind of come into land and we think about what the Lord might be inviting each of us as individuals to do about this, it might not be anything. It might be something, and it will look different for each of us. And particularly as we move into this new chapter as a church, we really feel that we are in the middle of a new chapter as Hope Vineyard. We've changed our venue. We've moved here. We've also changed our Small Steps Hope Projects venue. And so we think there's an invitation for us that want to consider it to pray about what our part might be. Now, as we said, please don't feel under any compulsion to do anything at all. We're just simply asking you, if you want to consider what the Lord is asking of you, who has been so generous and kind to us. Those of us who know Jesus, hopefully we would agree the Lord has been very kind to us. And our response is to be one of devotion. We want to be open-handed and generous with all that he has given us. And so we're wondering, is there another step of trust that he wants us to take, you to take, me to take, in further partnering with him in extending his kingdom here in Oxford and beyond? So what we're going to do now, So what we're going to do now is we're just going to have a time just to pray and just to consider all that we've heard. It may be that there is a very practical response that you want to make. You might want to review your own giving. In a moment, there'll also be a time to just click on that QR code on the postcard and on the screen as well. If you actually just want to just do something right now in the moment while it's fresh in your mind. Or you might want to go away and do that at another point. Or it might be that something's just really struck you from something that we've said, or that passage in 1 Chronicles about the joy that comes in giving. Maybe you've never known that. Maybe it's always felt like, oh, this is something I should do, but it's really hard and I'm really worried about it. We believe that there is a Lord who wants to give you freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, it says in the Bible. Giving can be such a source of freedom and joy. Or maybe it's just a reminder of just how good God is, how much he wants you to experience his goodness, a greater measure as his love, and to live in the overflow of that, just like that image of the glass, just overflowing with water. So let's just be quiet for a moment. If you want to close your eyes, if you want to even hold out your hands, then do that. And we're just going to pray and we're just going to wait quietly in God's presence.